Welcome to the second episode of our three-part AfroEcology live stream series. I'll be your host this evening. My name is Miniya Ali. I'm the Just Transition Communication Specialist here at Imagine Black, and we'll be joined today by LaQuida Landford. LaQuida is a community researcher, community health worker, and the lead visionary and executive director at Afro Village PDX. She created Afro Village as a grassroots movement to build community, reduce social isolation, and support the needs of Black women, people of the African diaspora, and other impacted systems of oppression and systematic racism. So before we get started, we've got a really fun conversation tonight about Afroecology and food justice and all the work that LaQuida does in that area. But before we get started, I just want to encourage you guys to give some likes and engagement if you're joining from the app. And feel free to place any questions that you have for LaQuida into the chat, and we'll try our best to make time for that at the end. So just as people are sort of joining in, LaQuida, I'll pass it to you with the first question, which is, how would you describe the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you guys for inviting me. It's an honor to be able to be a part of this conversation. My name is LaQuida Landford. My pronouns are she, her. Everyone in the community calls me Q. So I just wanted to share with you guys how grateful I am to be here this evening. And you said your question was, how does this work?
How would you describe the work that you do?
So how would I describe the work that I'm doing today? I would say I have a lot of confidence about the work that I'm doing today as the founder and executive director of Afro Village. I would say that several years ago, I was really inspired and also frustrated because of our housing crisis here. Well, in Portland, I'm in Detroit right now, but back in Portland, when I moved back to Portland in 2014, just navigating, having to navigate finding housing, finding healthcare. A lot of those things had changed from the 10 years that I had been gone from Portland. And I think another question is, am I from Portland? I'm not originally, but I had been living in Portland my first time in 1996. So I was there back in the day up until about 2005. And so, yeah, the work that I've been evolving into has, like I said, about the confidence that I currently have, but also I'm very grateful for the healing work and aspects of things that we do within Afro Village. Afro Village started off as like I said, a response, but to be a housing, an alternative space for Black women after I had gone through some of the changes and worked at Urban League of Portland as a housing caseworker. So today we have a few pillars. One is around housing justice, digital equity work, Afro wellness is one of our pillars, and community resiliency. And then like the support that we give to community. We're not doing direct services like, I don't know, like Rose Haven on a daily basis, but we are serving the community as best as possible with the needs of our community to also break the isolation, that a lot of us experienced during COVID, and that we feel like we're still experiencing possibly sometimes on a daily basis when there's challenges that comes up.
Amazing. Yeah. So that actually leads really well into the next question, especially with the current administration, right? There's a lot of headlines about houselessness in Portland.
Yeah.
And Old Town is sort of propped up as the poster child in a lot of that detrimental sort of propaganda spread about houselessness. So, according to you, or what are some of the main factors contributing to houselessness, particularly in Old Town, and what are the headlines missing about the situation?
Yeah, I would say, well, first, Old Town is my neighborhood. I've lived in Old Town for almost 12 years. So I've been there since 2014. It took me about 6 months myself to find an apartment or a solid place to live. And I think that from 2014 until now, what I've experienced is the increase in rent, which makes it difficult. And Old Town specifically is like the lowest barrier, like lowest income community because of the resources that are within those blocks, right? There's a radius of, there's the Union Gospel Station, there's Central City Concern, there is Blanche House, right? So there, that makes up the income for people is very low because Central City Concern provides housing for folks, but it also provides housing for people who are dealing with addiction, right? So the narrative that is being drawn into Old Town is just really coming from a lot of different voices. To be honest, in the 12 years that I've lived there and the amount of work that I've done in downtown and in the neighborhood, it really, just started off as me caring for Black women that I saw, that I knew from when I lived in Portland, and just the changes of displacement and gentrification when it comes to African American and African descent people. We are at the bottom of the, sometime at the bottom of the conversation, but also our numbers and the data is being utilized as if, we are, our people is struggling the most. And we really are, because we're not in one centralized place. And so, yeah, there's a lot of layers that's going on in Old Town. And so there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that are in the area as well. I've been in Old Town for about 5 years. As Afro Village, I was just doing grassroots work. I didn't think that I would be starting a community-based organization if you would have told me this 6 years ago. But it was just such a need to have a presence. And during COVID, when everything was shut down, and our governor said, stay at home and save lives, a lot of people came to Old Town or that area for those resources. But a lot of those resources were unstable because we were just in the very early stages of like people sheltering in place. So then months later, like let's say, the pandemic started in March. So by April, May, by the time George Floyd was murdered, that's when a lot of energy re-evolved in Old Town. People were just trying to survive and trying to make it.
Yeah. Thank you for giving us that timeline. I think that it's one of the important things about the work that you do is you can sort of like observe over time the changes that you're seeing in the activity in Old Town, the prices in rent, and then even when it comes to food as well.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the next question is, what is your personal definition of food justice? I know that's a portion of what you do in your work, and that's also really important to us in the Afroecology lens as well. But that would be my next question is, what is your personal definition of food justice?
Yeah, even like relating that to like the housing component,
Yeah.
within, stability, right? Like a person really having a stability. And I really struggled these last couple years because with Afro Village, like the intentions were by now for us to have uh, a space for our community, and that has not happened due to, whatever political strings there are or funding, and just aligning that up. And so when I first moved back to Portland, it wasn't housing that was like a major focus for me. It was food. And it evolved out of like my own personal experience with like health, and becoming conscious and like my early, I felt like conscious because of the roots that I come from. My family, my father's from Central America. So I partially grew up like in a Caribbean home, eating a certain way, having a certain behavior, and then going to Belize as a teenager, and then like having the cultural food that my ancestors and my grandmother prepared for us through times that would have been, observed as struggle. Right? They're some of the most important foods that we have been able to sustain ourselves off of for over 100 years. Like my grandmother was 96 years old, and she was still wanting her traditional foods. So food justice to me is us having accessibility, us being able to have the space to at this particular time to grow, our own foods and connect, and connect with the land. I think when I first started growing food, I was inspired by a group of African folks back in Houston. That's another area that I live. My father lives in Houston, Texas. So before I moved back to Portland in 2014, I was living in Houston, and there was these immigrants and refugee folks that came. They were working for this organization called Planet Forward. And when I tell y'all the big okras and the cabbage that I actually seen them, and I was like, oh my goodness, right? So when I came to Portland, that was just like on my mind. I was also in a space around green infrastructure. When Obama became the president, he was talking a lot about the green workforce. And, I looked at that as an opportunity because of the age that I was at that particular time. And I was working in the shipyard. And so, I just looked at that green as something that could have been helpful to the Black community, especially Black Americans, because our communities and our neighborhoods have always been labeled to be the hood, right? To you live in a project. And where that comes from is a misunderstanding around it. Actually started off as a project, right? But then it just became a name because we were not involved in the community placement of our foods and our in our stores and things like that. So yeah, food justice to me at this particular time is around us having accessibility and it being sustainable, as we see what is happening with this administration and the shutdown because of 40 acres and a mule didn't get directly to our people. We don't have those homesteads like, depending on where you're at, like in Houston, or there's folks that have a lot of land. And not being out here in Detroit, they've reclaimed a lot of those spaces and they're growing their own food. And so yeah, it means a lot to be able to do that nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. I think about, especially when it comes to the food desert issue that most cities experience, Black Americans tend to bear the brunt of that. And so in terms
Mhm.
of like, especially for AfroEcology, it's like access to green in many ways, right? Like green foods, having quick access to that, but also green spaces. That is something
Yeah,
that is really lacking, and it's important for mental health. It's important for your physical health, and so I definitely agree with your definition of food justice.
yeah, and
Um,
I would say like even like in downtown in the Old Town area in my 20s, I lived on Fifth and Davis, and
okay,
so the only fret like that was back in like late 90s, early 2000s, and so there was no Whole Foods, there was no New Seasons, um, there was Fred Meyer's and there was Safeway that I can
yeah,
recall, or there was Winco, and that was far, and if you had access to Costco, that was having a card. And in our 20s, I didn't have that. So it was really a really tight, we had corner stores that had a lot of junk food and they were not owned by, they're owned by people of color, but they were not owned by Black people specifically. So there wasn't anything. You got mostly like what was available, possibly not the best things for us. But like I remember back in the 2000s that it was just, yeah, Fred Meyer's on Burnside. And I believe, Safeway on Broadway because that's the area that I lived. Well, down in that area. So now there's a couple other grocery venues that people have access because they built the Pearl. So you have Safeway in the Pearl. You have what is that other space? You have Whole Foods. You
yeah,
have
yeah,
yeah.
hmm
So that again that that's a part of it too. It took displacement other people to move to say, oh, this is what we want in our neighborhood, right?
yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah. And it's so funny because Portland is such like one of the stereotypes is that we're such a health conscious city and like lots of different food options and like different things to access, but it's sort of really disheartening that our community cannot necessarily access um that you know
yeah,
that food. It's very much in a way like you go to these spaces where like the New Seasons are in the Whole Foods, you don't necessarily feel as if you're supposed to be there,
yeah.
um and
And I
that's
think for me back then, like being from, had just moved back to the United States and was living in Belize for 5 years, like and moved to Portland. I moved to Portland because my auntie moved from LA to Oregon and I was just starting my life. So she thought it would be a great idea for me to come to Portland and be with her. But just to have like your Caribbean food, right? There was no Jamaican restaurant, no Belizean restaurant. Like I craved that and and I within 6 months that I was back in the US after all of that amount, I gained a lot of weight because I was eating, I was now eating chips and I was eating noodles or I was eating like fast food or something like that because I like also missed it, but then it just like it wasn't so good for my body. So like so yeah, like just the accessibility around food is so important to our culture and our DNA.
Absolutely. I'm actually, well, Bruce actually put a really good question on at the end of our conversation, but I think it actually coincides better with what we're talking about now.
Mhm.
Um, but the question is, how will the massive cuts to SNAP benefits affect your day-to-day food justice work? I feel like this is really, really, really pertinent now.
Yeah, I would say, like, just like many folks that have been, uplifting that since COVID. And I think that it's it may seem like it's a right now today because it's a different crisis than when it actually was during the pandemic. But I felt like there was some lessons learned when things shut down, and people. And I think a lot is what not even talked about with SNAP benefits is that people SNAP. I know quite a few people in our community that their SNAPs has gotten stolen, right? From,
Mm.
there's these machines that Fred Meyer's, I know someone, an elder that went to Fred Meyer's to go grocery shopping, and this was like 2 months ago, and their snaps got taken away from, or like was already used before they even got a chance to utilize them because somebody had stolen them.
Wow.
So that one, that's not being talked about, right? That had not been brought up, and then it takes a while for the people. You got to go through that process. It's not an easy process. And with everything that's going on, it it's given us a different way. Again, go back to like thinking about if we were growing our own food accessibility. So at Afro Village this summer, we partnered with another organization that we had been, since we don't have our own land, partnered with Play Grow Learn. And they're like a really supportive organization. And we also work with Black Food Sovereignty Coalition and a couple other organizations in the community. But I started nurturing our village. And so we were giving away a CSA, part of the other organization CSA, where we called it a pop-up because we didn't want to put any stipulations on people coming by and getting fresh produce, as it was seasonal. So like our very first day, all we had was like collard greens and onions and garlic. And as the season opened up, we started to have more produce, which was local. I would go to the farmers market out in Gresham every Sunday and pick our produce, and really be excited about being able to connect directly with the farmer and knew exactly where our produce and our vegetables was coming, our produce and our fruit were coming from. And so it brought a lot of excitement from the folks that were stopping by our space, sharing, what meals they were able to make with it. And so that we were already looking at, I think before this even happened, of ways that we can have a supply of produce, after, so things wouldn't go to waste, because there's peppers. When we think about, I don't like canned goods, right? And so when the Oregon Food Bank or any food banks give things out to the community in the past, that's, I grew up sometimes my mom having to go to a pantry to get food. And it didn't make her feel good because there was like, oh, you didn't have enough, right? So I think that what we do good at, some of our organizations like Freedom and Equitable Giving Circle and the Come Through Market and the People's Market, that's something that is ongoing so that our communities of color can have fresh access. So it's up to us to show up to these spaces and support the organizations, because when we're in a crisis like this, it's like, yeah, I believe in giving away, I believe in all of that. But at a time like this, we're going to need people to help us harvest, because the farmers that we work with, their seasons are ending, or they were planning on ending the season. And so now we're all scattered. Like, what do we do, and how are we going to do that? And it's just not like it's the snaps, which I did a whole like conversation about this about a week ago when it just happened around food stamps, because when I grew up, it was the booklet,
Mhm.
right? And so it was not EBT, which became an electronic thing. If you look at the history, you'll see all of these different things that we have been through as Black people, and it really was a way from the USDA, from the agriculture, was like basically kind of what we're doing today, to use that voucher to get fresh produce, because that was excess produce from a farmer. Was never supposed to be what it is today, but greed and politics is what stimulated for it to continue to keeping us in a box as people of color.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know about that specific history, but yeah, that I'm thinking about what you're saying about the importance of supporting orgs like you, Equitable Giving Circle, Feed 'em Freedom. I think one thing that's happening, especially with the whole thing with SNAP, is that our systems of community and support are being tested in a way that is definitely similar to COVID, but it's being tested. And I've been seeing, given the panic, I've been seeing community come together in a way that I really haven't seen before. I think I've seen like different restaurants offer like certain meals for people who may be losing their SNAP and like
Right.
people donating to those restaurants just in case. And so I was like, this is what we need to do just in case so we can understand that, we can rely on, the government, but it's also good to rely on community and build community just in case
Yeah.
those things get taken away. And so hopefully
And I
we're,
hope that I hope that what happens, Mia, not to cut you off, I hope that what happens is
yeah,
that, it doesn't, like, what we see is things happen to be a trend, right? It's like no
yeah,
one was thinking about it. It's just like COVID, right? Like when COVID-19 first was announced, they talked about people having COVID, they talked about people dying, and until it was this whole big, the shutdown. Oh, we need to
yeah,
shut down because, and what I, back during COVID time, I really was paying attention to what the state of New York was talking about because they're 3 hours ahead. I've always been like a little bit ahead of my time and how they were dealing with the situation, and what fires they were putting out immediately. And I started a conversation several years ago, probably around 2016, around emergency preparedness because of even like relearning about Vanport, relearning about and being and seeing Hurricane Katrina, and then the things with climate, our climate changing, that's a huge part of even our food sources, our water sources. So it's about being more prepared. And again, white people are able, they have the privilege, they have a home. We've been displaced, we've been scattered, and so it's harder for us to come together and think about what are those possibilities. So then when you have this coffee shop or whomever say that they're doing a good thing, like, what does that look like beyond when people get
long
their
term.
snaps long term? Because during
Yeah,
COVID, similar things was happening where you could have ordered food from a restaurant and you could have went to pick it up because of COVID. And those restaurants were like giving food, like good food, quality food, because we do have a central food hub within our city. If anything, that's what we do know. Nobody's gonna really go hungry in Portland, Oregon.
yeah. No, that's a great point in terms of like the sustainability. And one of the things I thought it's like kind of a double-edged sword because how much of this is a sustainable long-term effort that you're doing by giving this food away, and how much of it is like marketing. Another thing that I have to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, Black Lives Matter signs in businesses window, during that time. And, it was considered to be as a solidarity for Black lives and as a support to Black people. But beyond that, again, seeing them float in the pearl in different places, like I'm a very I observe things, and connect the dots. And so it just started to look like for me after a few years, like a graveyard sign to say, oh yeah, Black lives matter, but like there's nobody Black that work for you. There's nobody Black that live next to you. There's nobody Black that, you know, at all. So like I wanted to get away from that, right? I wanted to get away from BLM and I wanted to get back to our roots of our Afro centric and where we're at in this conversation that we're talking about. Because if we don't invest in ourselves and if we don't invest in each other, then those we're going to continue to keep feeling and experiencing what it is that we're feeling. Like when you become a nonprofit organization, like we don't really want to be all of that, but let's take the money and the funding and let's push it like for seed so that it can grow beyond a grant that's only for 1 year, that is in 12 months, and you got to do a lot of reporting, you got to do all these things in order to keep that going. So that's a part that's not sustainable and doesn't make us become self-sufficient within these processes, because it kind of continue to keep having us be in this chaotic mindset and uncertainty. And that's what it is. I'm like, I don't want to be a hoarder because I grabbed a bunch of stuff during COVID. I'm like, if there's no food, I got my vitamins, I got my water, and I think I'm gonna be okay. So like, what does that 35-day supply looks like for a person in a family?
Yeah. definitely. I absolutely agree. So the next question I have, and I'm very curious what your answer is to this, is I'm doing a little research and I noticed that your work has a particular focus on Black women.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering why does it have that particular focus in like the space of houselessness and food justice? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. It's like Pac said, we are Black queens, mamas, right? And so
Mhm.
the Black woman is a significant plays a significant role in our society, and the Black woman brings a lot of life and a lot of joy to to spaces. I remember growing up when it was around that Easter time that you would get your hair washed and get your hair pressed, and it was kind of like something that was traditionally passed down from your great grandmother to your mother to now you. And so I just, I grew up partially in a single parent home. My mother had me at 15. When she got pregnant with me at 15, she had me at 16 years old. And so, my mom, I appreciate her and I'm grateful because she could have, I couldn't have not been here, right? Because those times was like you're too young to have a kid, but she brought me through, and so I respect Black women. I love Black women, and I will always support a Black woman in her efforts. And even if a Black woman is in a transitional stage in her life, I've been in my 20s, I've been in my 30s, and now I'm in my 40s. And so I feel like that what I've seen in some of the most powerful Black women, I'm even here in Detroit. This is my second time within a month. Actually, I was here last month and I went to the Henry Ford Museum and got a chance to sit on the bus that Rosa Parks sat on in 1956, or when that incident happened, right? And there's a whole dialogue about her and that bus. And and as we're working on this project we call Afrofuturism Oasis, with reusing the train to bring a community resiliency hub to community in this day, it just remind me of like how special she was and how resilient. And I mean, I think we utilize resilient, but like how she was like, I'm not moving, you can't budge me. And so that's what I appreciate and love about a Black woman, that by any means necessary, that Black woman is gonna take care of what she can when she can, and she's gonna make the best out of what she has.
Absolutely. It's like, and my aunt used to say, when you educate a woman, you educate the world, just by the nature of how, women tend to want to be outward people. And so it's getting the resources will most likely impact the most people. And there's
Oh
so
yeah.
much on that as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'm super excited to be here in Detroit, as like just been as I came back, been conversing with folks, but they have their first Black female
yeah,
mayor,
yeah,
and he's 38 years old. There's going to be a lot of hype this weekend about things, and I've seen people. I've only been here for like almost 24 hours, but it's definitely felt, and I think that she's gonna do amazing things from what I hear from the local people talking about how much they appreciate her, and they believe that the current mayor has done his duties to bring the revitalization of Detroit, and she's going to be able to carry on a next era. So it's exciting to see all of these Black women that have just this week become leaders in government in our community, in their communities, and for us to like combat the 300,000 Black women that have been released from their jobs this year because of DEI or the language. But again, we are resilient and we will show up by any means necessary.
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think somebody in the chat mentioned federal employees who were laid off as well. So that's also another part that needs to be touched on. Switching gears a little bit, this was also something that I found to be really fascinating and something that I've also been thinking about a lot too. So the next question is, how can isolation be a tool of oppression? And
Mhm.
how can we begin building community? I saw in some of the work that you do that isolation is something that you focus on, and that's like your organization. I think is one of the few that I think in my research have really touched on that as a specific thing that we should be working towards sort of solving.
Mhm.
like the loneliness epidemic that a lot of people are experiencing and how that also can be tied to not being able to get resources and a lack of community. So I'd love to know what you think about that. So the question again is, how can isolation be a tool of oppression, and how can we begin building community?
Yeah, I think that when we experience certain things, as Black people, sometimes we by nature, and I think we have kept certain things to ourselves, because we were told, especially, a particular era that you grew up, don't go talking to those people, you know, um, about your business, right? If you're looking at it as your business. And I think that also, like, look at us today. We're here. You guys are in Portland. I'm in Detroit. We're on a Zoom. Social media technology has really, put a wedge in generations as well. And, folks could feel comfortable with not even have to see a person or talk to a person because they can be able to do something like this, right? And so, again, I felt like, the amount of years going on, almost 12 years that I've been in Portland, I was really excited, when I moved back because there was a lot more happening than when I left. But then again, it still feels to me sometimes I feel isolated, as much as I do, because I have to plan where I'm going to go. Most of what we do in Black community it revolves around an event, you know, and us having to do a lot of logistics and a lot of planning and a lot of just a lot of labor within it just to keep ourselves safe while we see our counterparts or other people, white people specifically in Portland, they can show up 3 or 4 walking down Alberta. In 1998, you couldn't see 4 Black people walking down Alberta without the police thinking that they were doing something that they didn't have no business doing, right? And so white people can go to the park, they can go to any park, and be in the company of each other. When us, we gotta plan and so it still feel like isolation. So when one of our grants, or our third largest grant that we had received, was through the Oregon Health Authority, and it was from the tobacco taxes. And this was I believe we applied early 2022. And by April of 2022, we had received funding, or an announcement that we were going to receive funding, which was super big for me because I didn't have an office space, I wasn't getting paid, none whatsoever. I was volunteering a lot of the work that I do and wouldn't consider it as volunteering. I was like, it was a movement to me. I cared about the people and all of the things that was happening. And so that funding allowed us to start to build an infrastructure, right? Start to build and a huge component around that, it being around health and tobacco. I really wanted to tap into some things that our community may have not been thinking about, like acupuncture. When I think about isolation, sometimes it comes from stress. Sometimes something can happen and you just choose to, just don't want to deal with things. And so I was trying to think about the most creative ways and the most innovative ways to getting people outside of their homes, in that halfway period of being us being isolated, because of COVID, having to wear a mask, keeping 6 foot deep. So that's when I really start to look within that area of our work of how to help support people be able to not feel like they're the only ones. And I also live with the autoimmune disease myself. So, dealing with MS, sometimes I don't feel like doing anything or going anywhere. And so knowing that you have a network of people in your support system is very helpful, is all
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, and being able to have those tools that help you get through some of the harder days for yourself. And I think we do that. I think in Portland, I think we do a really great job at that, and I think we've been striving towards that for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, definitely. I think that as we were sort of drafting the AfroEcology zine, which by the way, if you just joined, welcome to the AfroEcology series. We also have an AfroEcology zine available. It's currently available right now at Third Eye Books, but it'll also be available for you to order. We'll have that information soon. But one of the things we were thinking about Speaking of just like isolation, is that how us as people of African descent are living under a dominant culture that values individualism,
Mhm.
really more than community. And sometimes it can be um, seen as like you're lazy or, not efficient enough if you have to lean on other people. And so it's just like rewiring our brain to see like, hey, this is something from Western European culture. We can get into like the history of that,
Yeah,
why that culture is the way that is, but it's not something that is indigenous to us.
right.
Being more community based is something that is is more natural for us. And
Just if
so
even look around. I think about even driving a car sometimes, right? Like having a vehicle that you're the driver and there's three other seats,
yeah,
and you're like you're the driver and you're just like in your car, and what I love about like, my country and being able to experience living in Central America. My grandmother was like, I can go back to Belize as I had to for a family emergency last month, and people still will recognize me just from hearing my voice in my neighborhood and be so happy that I arrived. And they just be like, so because we are beyond a community, we are a village. And so when I started thinking about Afro Village, it was like I said, it was an alternative. It was about Black people, and I witnessed that home that time with my grandmother, and she broke it down to me. She was 94 years old at the time, and she just like pointed out everybody's house on the in our neighborhood that she grew up in, and it just made me. And if for some reason, when I came back, I was just like Afro. I had these great Afro earrings, and I was like village because it was just really my grandmother that was installing that in me. She was like when she first came to the U.S. as an immigrant in L.A., she took a lot of people in, like her house became that space. So if somebody just landed to the US and then they came to LA, she had a big enough place to like help people get a start and then get them a job, get them, direct them, so that they can go on their path. And that's what it took. It took that village, it took that community, it took that neighbor to look out for that person so that they wouldn't have to go through what it is that they were going through by themselves. And I think that, sometimes in Portland, we forget about that. You can see another Black person, and sometimes that Black person won't even speak to you. And I'm like, what are we doing? But you online talking this and that and the other. But when you see me in person, bruh, when you see me in person, you act like you don't even see me. Like, what are we talking about? So we got to get a little bit better at that. And I think that, there's some gaps in between things. But yeah, we got to check in on each other.
absolutely. Yeah. So pivoting a little bit to a bit of a different topic, um, you were a really pivotal part of the AfroEcology framework in general. And one of the things that we talked about with our guests in the last episode is it's important to get Black people to reconnect to the land,
Mhm.
um, because not only just for our own benefit, but we have a lot of climate things coming up that, I always say that Black Americans, Black people in this country, are the moral compass. We always seem to be ahead and we seem to steer things in a way that we need as a country.
Yeah.
And when I think about the environmental justice portion and the housing justice portion, I'm wondering how you see those things collaborating with each other or affecting each other. One of the things that comes to mind for me is some of the extreme weather that we are experiencing with the heat wave that hit. What was that, September of like 2021?
Yeah.
That affected the housing population. And then as our winters get harsher, how do you really see environmental justice and housing justice collaborating together or working together or affecting each other? It's a pretty broad question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, no, thanks for that. I think that, at this point, as you mentioned, when I first moved back to Portland or when I arrived during the 2014 snowstorm, right? In February. I came February 9th. So this February coming 2026 is going to be 12 years that I've been in Portland. And I would never forget, like, I came on the bus and I had to be detoured because of the snowstorm. And that was the 2016 snowstorm that we had in Portland and Oregon, that we lost 8 people who were unhoused, that were living on the streets, because we were not prepared. Again, it goes to this preparedness. And then as we have experienced and we're seeing what's happening around, different parts of the country. I mean, look what just happened to Jamaica this last past week, and what their, the type of infrastructure. So like being here in Detroit, I think what I was mostly inspired by are some of the conversations today was about, yeah, we're talking about sustainability, but we're also talking about merging those two aspects together for the future. So just looking at like how things are going to be built for us and how the foundation is going to be sound to weather through, these climate change situations that we're dealing with. In Portland, they're in the port apartments that were built in the 70s, 80s, 90s did not have air AC units, right? And so then now you have to, now the summers are much warmer and we may need a AC unit, and sometimes people can't afford those, or if you're in an apartment complex, you have to go through a lot of red tape just to be able to get that, get that for your unit to be cooled. So it's like as we think about the future of building, retrofitting, using clean energy to lower bills and make things more. I think we throw around sustainability, but I think that something affordability. I really don't crave the word around affordable housing anymore, because I believe we have enough units for everyone, right? And I think that yes, we would love for it to be affordable, but they're also putting us in a box to say that this affordability, you have to make this income, right? You can't make over this amount to live in this space. So again, if Oregon is thinking, because I was on a project to build 253,000 affordable units by, I think they said 2040 or 2035, then we're going to continue to just be renting. We're not going to be homeowners. So when we're in crisis like today, we can't go in our backyard and pull some of the food that we've been growing because we don't have that particular space, right? And what we see with white people or folks who have that, they may have that and they're a little bit more prepared than we are. So if we're in a unit, then your rent, you can start off with thinking, oh, that was great. I got in, it was $1,000. But every year that you live in that place, your rent is going up.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
just continue, and you're not getting anything for your money. You're in the same place. You may have to be dealing with like a management company that don't care about us. So we got to look at how we build our future. What does our future look like? Really to lean in on when we say Afrofuturism or futurism in general, to look at the spirit of these assets that we're building, so that y'all who are in y'all 20s are coming up behind us, that I'm not on my way out, but I want to make sure I have a clearer path than what I entered, right? And I want to make sure that path is as clear as possible, so when somebody comes behind me and on the side of me, in front of me, you're able to see exactly what it is that you're able to see for yourself. And it's an alignment. It's an alignment, and it's how we govern our own selves within our own neighborhoods. And that's a significant part of, like, in Portland, we talk about, or we say community, but we're having community right here. It's when you're in your neighborhood, you're like, what's in my neighborhood? I am proud to be a part of X, Y, and Z, what's going on in our neighborhood, which will allow people to want to be voters, right? That would to want to contribute to make some contribution to their neighborhood, because they're seeing things that they want to get, that they may want to change or improve, or maybe make it stay the same. So yeah, sorry. That's
No.
been something that's been on my mind.
Yeah. No, that's really good. So we got 6:15. So we got a couple of questions in the chat, some good questions.
Sure.
So the
I can't
first
see
one,
anybody.
oh no, you're good. I will relay them over to you. So the first one is from Imani, and she says, I would like a breakdown on what preparedness can look like. And she actually stole that question right from me, because I was going to ask that as well.
What does preparedness look like?
Yeah. So I'm thinking, like, so we talked a lot about preparedness in terms of like with the SNAP benefits, like community, and not being reactive and being more prepared. I think that
Yeah,
was,
I think us, paying more attention, to where we also source our news
yeah.
and, information, and doing our own research of our own. So I feel like if your house, right, what is the things that you may not even think about that is a part of your emergency preparedness? Like if your lights were to go out right now, what would you do besides lighting a candle? Even if you if you lit the candle, right? Do you have matches? Is your lighters up to date? You know, things like that. Where's that side? I know we all have a junk drawer, right, in our homes. Most of the time, it doesn't start off that way, but then you start putting everything in that drawer that becomes that junk drawer. So what's in that drawer, right? Like, you know, dedicating some space in your unit, in your car, to like be more, you know, have those things on hand for you. If we're talking about an emergency, and even if we're talking about food, you know, it's like, okay, in Oregon, collard greens grow all year round, right? Kale grows all year round. These are some of the things that no matter what, how are you prepared? Your system, like, do you eat 3 times a day? Do you believe that you need 3 meals a day to get yourself through? If you do, then prepare for that, because that's 3 times what the amount, you know, for you and someone in your family. We're talking about that type of emergency. And if we're also talking about emergency, well, man, I don't have, you know, there's older people or people with disabilities, they're on fixed incomes, right? So like if something happens outside of their normal, you know, budget, then that puts them in a really tough situation where they may not want to borrow money from anybody or anything like that. But like, again, how do we be innovative and create, you know, systems? A lot of things that I've learned from the beginning of the year, which is what got me really interested in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. I think people thought I was crazy, but it's like, we're talking about circular economies, right? We're talking about an exchange. We mentioned about you barter and I trade, but what does that really look like? We're currently doing peer-to-peer um, peer-to-peer systems, like using Cash App, using PayPal, you know, but really like we just kind of started using those things, then we don't really know much about it. So let's pause and let's get to know those things so we can be better prepared for our future.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question, and you guys can feel free to put more questions in the chat. We've got around like 10 to 12 minutes. Is from Angela. I think Angela also is from a Belizean family background and asks, is there any Belizean culture and or community here in Portland / the Pacific Northwest, Columbia Gorge area? And can you share if you've been able to find community that way?
Yeah. I may talk to Angela and Kriya and tell her we don't got nobody. um, we really don't have a wide community of Belizeans, or as we call ourselves, Belizean people from the diaspora in Portland. But we do have a lot of people in LA, and we do have a really strong Honduranian Garifuna community in Seattle. So when it comes to Portland, there are a few of people that I've known over the years, like my family. It's my uncle and my auntie, you know, but there's no place for us. So we really will connect to the Jamaican community because of like the Caribbean. There's not a lot of Trini people here in the Pacific Northwest. So like places like LA, New York, those folks just naturally come together because they're all in this like one melting pot.
Yeah. I love how she got broader and broader with the area because I think she was like, I know it's not just in Portland. Let's make sure there's other questions in the chat. Okay, I think she said something about what was the PNW area you mentioned. LA relatives, something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe you can reframe the question, Angela, and I can bounce back to you. But looks like she's trying to connect to some more Caribbean community, which, yeah,
It's very
it's definitely
small.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a Belizean, it's called Belize Love, but it's a restaurant, and it's not owned by Belizean people. They're just a couple who went to Belize on their honeymoon and was very like inspired by our cultural chicken. And I love Tiffany and her husband Adam, but that's what I found out about Belize Love when I first, because they were a small food cart, and they do
Okay.
have a restaurant by Portland State. And so but they're not Belizean people. So
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That's as close as we can get.
That's as close as we're gonna get that I know of. And I've been in Portland, you know, I've been around. So
Definitely. Okay, well, looks like there's no other questions in the chat for now. Um, but we'll wrap it up with this one final question. So Afro Village recently celebrated its 5th year anniversary. What do you think has been the key to your organization's growth, and what do you see for the next 5 years? We'll end it off with that one.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it wasn't something that I thought, as far as like Afro Village as an organization. I looked at Afro Village at the particular time in 2019, 2018, 2019 to be transitional housing, right? Like an opportunity that I was working with Portland State University through their homeless action collaborative department as a researcher. So I've done an extensive amount of research on tiny home communities. The way that I think about tiny homes is not the way I think about it now. I was also thinking about when we talked about earlier, like folks in Old Town, getting folks off the street. I look at that as more, something a little bit more valuable than something that's just a short-term solution for a long-term issue, right? And so, yeah, we celebrated, our 5 years due to like COVID also really is what was supportive of like the work that I was doing as an individual and as a grassroots organizer, and just organized out of necessity and out of urgency. And so and I celebrated where I started at, which was at Floyd's Coffee Shop at the time, which is now Cafe Unite, which is where we have um, a Wi-Fi project at that location. So anybody that's in the area that goes in the coffee shop can log on to Afro Village's landing page and be able to have access to Wi-Fi in Old Town. And so I would say, like within the last 5 years, a lot of the funding that I've received has gone back to that neighborhood and back into the community as well. And so, as I mentioned about the train project, it was something that I was just curious about. Same thing, organizing um, that is now a full-fledged project. That so for the next 5 years, where we've already solidified some land, which is some land by PBOT. So just thinking through land ownership or stewardship of any sort, and it being in a historical Black neighborhood, the Albina district, and bringing some life and restoration back over in that space as well. And we got a Portland Clean Energy Fund grant last year that is allowing us to, it's not all of what we asked for, but it's allowing us to get the project started to move the trains next year. It's going to be the end of this year, but most likely early part of next year, and start that conversion of the trains so that we can have this beautiful space we call Afrofuturism Oasis. And so I know that we have that land, an agreement for 5 to 10 years. We can renew that after those 10 years. And we also was awarded a Metro grant of Natures and Neighborhood earlier, just a couple months ago, still going through the process of that. But that's to also put in trees and vegetation and things of that. And that's a 3-year grant pr- process that we'll go through. So over the next couple years, God willing, we'll be secure to be able to do that. Now, when it comes to um, grants. And it's been very challenging this year, as a lot of us know who are in this space of being a small emergent organization, looking for those dollars to keep our operations and keep the people that are working for us stable, so we don't have to, kind of keep going down through this rat race of doing that. So, but as far as that project is very secure in many ways, and being here in Detroit really gave me some inspiration and some power that, I'm doing the right thing. I'm on the right track. I'm thinking about the past, the present, and the future of our community and our neighborhoods.
Awesome. Yeah, so my final wrap up was going to be, and looks like someone also asked in the chat, how can they connect with you after this event? I'm going to paste the Afro Village website into the chat so you guys can check it out. But what's the best way to get involved or connect with Afro Village and get involved with some of the work that you do?
Yeah, we have a very a very active Instagram page where we have a lot of things that's updated about what is the monthly activities that we're doing. We also have space at the Lloyd Center Mall. So we're there on most days. We're still working on our produce giveaway, and we have a monthly acupuncture that folks can come in and drop in. And then if folks just want to connect with me, they can find me there. Or my email address is LaQuida, LAQUIDA, AfroVillagePDX.org. Shoot me an email to set up time, and yeah, let's keep moving forward.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for joining. I love that you guys were so active. Yes, Angela, I'll also put it in the chat too. Sorry, on the app as well, so you guys can make sure you have that. Thank you so much, LaQuida, for this amazing interview.
Thank you.
We will be talking more next week with our third and final episode of the AfroEcology live stream series. It'll be with Malcolm Hoover, same time, same place, but we'll also have an in-person option. So if anybody wants to join in person, we'll have food, and we'll also be live streaming onto the app as well. But thank you all so much for your great questions and participation and comments. Thank you, LaQuida, for your time squeezing us in, even though it's so late in Detroit right now.
Yeah. And I want to say right before I leave is that, people who are on the call, and continue to stay connected to what Imagine Black is doing, multiple organizations, but like the AfroEcology, I hope that people are able to pick up the zine or even take a look at the framework that was started, several years ago in response to climate justice, in response to just transit. So get involved, you guys, if you're not thinking like where to start at, start somewhere and, start making some of those moves so that we can be a stronger community together and we can be a healthier community and a thriving community in the next 5 years. You asked about the next 5 years. It's us really being strategic and mastering and upscaling ourselves so that we can all feel that we're giving a contribution to our ancestors and to the work that we want to see and be a part of.
Definitely. That was a great way to end it off. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hope to see you all next week at the next AfroEcology Live. Yeah, Bruce just posted in the chat where you can RSVP for that. Come to our events. We talked about community and Imagine Black. We host events pretty much every month to every other month. So if you're bored or you need something to do, looking for community, or if you just want to eat dinner and listen to me and LaQuida talk or drink tea and incorporate community into your life in that way, I'm all for treating this like a podcast and just, doing your dishes while listening to LaQuida talk about community. That's just the best of both worlds. So feel free to tap in. We also have yin yoga sessions here every Wednesday in this space at 12:30. Tap in and get connected with LaQuida or me. I'll also put my email on the comments for this live stream after. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time.
At Imagine Black, we envision living in a city that loves Black people. We imagine a world where every Black person has the rights, resources, and recognition to be part of a thriving, resilient, and connected community. We are freedom dreamers. Now is the time to invest in Black liberation and self-determination. Your support is critical to this work. A donation to Imagine Black helps us maintain our capacity to affect change in the Black community. Your contributions can help us build Black voter power, advance the call to reimagine our public safety and criminal justice system, and push for a just transition from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. We all have a role to play in the movement for Black liberation. Go to imagineblack.org/donate. Please give generously. Together we will turn dreams into reality.